when you start to think about what we've now done is people have become convinced they should chronically be on probiotics. And so what happens if you take 35 billion or 50 billion copies of the same bacteria every day? Oh my gosh, you're creating a monoculture in your intestines. And so all of us need to stop using probiotics chronically. I think that, you know, we have a $30 billion industry with zero science behind it. Nothing has really ever shown that probiotics do this or really help that. There's, you know, a couple thousand studies that have been done with marginal results in some areas, but nobody knows why the results are happening or how they're any benefit. I think that it's time for us to start saying, okay, if you're going to use a probiotic, at most maybe 2 weeks. And when do you use it? Maybe after an infection, maybe after an antibiotic exposure, maybe after a Lyme exposure, maybe after chemotherapy. These are sensible times to say, okay, I bet the system's screwed up. Let's just throw something new into the ballpark and see if it helps. But now I've told you in 2012 we found a communication network between the bacteria. And so this is the new paradigm of what happens if we stop trying to over-engineer which bacteria are and just give back the cell signal that the gut is supposed to have. We had a communication issue just a few minutes ago putting the podcast together. I couldn't hear you, you could hear me, then I was calling you, and we had this network of IT confusion. That's what's happening to the gut. That's the human gut right now, is some bacteria can hear, others are like, what? And it's total disconnect. And so you put the communication network back in, and then immediately everybody knows what the other one needs. And you know, now I can hear you, you can hear me, we can have a conversation. It's exactly the same scenario for the bacteria. You put that communication network in, and the bacteria can in an instant say, whoa, way too much candida in the system. Start producing antifungal. So the bacteria actually make antifungal little oxidant molecules and everything else and start knocking back the fungus, the candida and the yeast. And so you got that knockout. You know, another example is after the antibiotic exposure, there's little pockets in the intestine that are protected from that. I really believe the appendix is probably the most important piece of the colon. We've been cutting the appendix out of humans for decades, saying that it was a useless remnant of when we actually used to be bunny rabbits who have these big appendices. You know, and so we had been convinced that it was a useless remnant of evolution that we have an appendix. That little finger-like projection from the colon is actually a little island of unique bacterial species. And so when you have a big gastroenteritis or something tearing through the colon to screw up the environment, the appendix is this protected little haven to keep the ecosystem there. When you put the communication network with the first few sips of this liquid communication circuit breaker network of the redox molecules, the circuit board goes in, whether it's from the appendix or maybe pockets behind the tonsils or wherever it is, these little niches of bacteria say, oh, we're the ones needed. They can jump in there, proliferate, and within days you have a gut that's doing something different.
So the product is Redox Restore, which has these redox molecules in it. Meredith, you might want to grab a bottle of it, because now let's talk a little bit about, you know, Dr. Bush. So what you just discussed, you found in soils, and I think you found it in like 7 layers deep in ligite soil. These bacteria that produce these redox molecules cohabitate in that deep layer, and those redox molecules are in that product that she just held up. And I'd have to say, we've had some very, very amazing results with the product. We've had some unique results with the product. To the point of, and I'll let Meredith explain her results, but when I had many people take it, even just a tablespoon, they got headaches, GI distress, you know, some bloating perhaps, which I immediately said, great, the product works.
Yes, exactly.
You know, so, I mean, that was a good thing for me, you know. And, of course, when I got it, Zach, I you know, started chugging high amounts of it to see what it did do. I got headaches, you know, so I had to cut back. So, you know, from that standpoint, before I ever gave it to a patient, I had my own little experiment, and that was interesting. And I had one of my children who got some symptoms after taking it. Now, Meredith, on the other hand, got no symptoms at all. right? I mean, she didn't notice.
So actually, you both got a result. You just were expecting to get the same result. And so, and the reason is, and there's absolutely no offense in any of these comments, but the reason has to do with age a little bit. And so the aging process, with each decade that passes in our life, we lose mitochondria. And as the aging process, with the loss of mitochondria, one of the important things that's happening is you're losing electrical charge that's made by that mitochondrial metabolism across the cell membrane. The higher the electrical charge inside the cell, the more water will be pulled inside the cell. The more water inside the cell, the more nutrient. And so at a youthful state, we're very well hydrated inside the cells. As we age, we get increasingly dehydrated. The more toxic the food environment has gotten and everything else, it's accelerated the death rate of the mitochondria, and it's accelerated the rate at which we get dehydrated, the age at which we start getting dehydrated. But what's happened here is you guys both have the exact same biologic result. You had massive transformation with even your first couple of uses of the product. But the difference had to do with the hydration state when you started. If you get a headache into that first week, or you start to get some bloating where the bowel wall is starting to change its hydration status, you can be convinced that you were dehydrated inside the cell. And so before you started the product, you were dehydrated. And part of that was because of a loss of mitochondria, but a bigger part of it has to do with something called tight junctions that was already mentioned. Right. The tight junctions are vulnerable because of a loss of bacteria. We now know that. We didn't know that until we started our science. Nobody has yet known that. Our publications are all in peer-reviewed process, almost a year into it now. We've got about 8 journal articles that will be out in the next year to really kind of help delineate all this science for everybody better. But what we now know is this communication network of the bacteria are actually the front line of defense for the tight junction, which is the firewall between you and the outside world. And that when that firewall goes down, you start leaking water out of your body into the colon. The colon is supposed to absorb all the water from your food into your body. But when you have a leaky colon, you actually get a little bit of water tracking back into the colon. That leads to even more dehydration in your patient or in yourself. And that chronic dehydration state can be fixed in an instant when you put back in the liquid circuit board of the redox molecules. We show that change happening within 3 to 5 minutes. There's a time-lapse video on our website that shows the destruction and protection of tight junctions, and that's a powerful one. But in 16 minutes, you're already changing tight junction integrity with the product. That continues to improve. You get stronger and stronger and stronger tight junctions for 6 days straight on small bowel membranes and colon membranes. And so both of you experienced an immediate improvement in your tight junction system, which meant you could absorb water and nutrients faster. And so now, hearing both of your stories, I can say, Meredith, you were more hydrated inside the cell than Dr. Pompa was. And that doesn't mean he was super dehydrated. He just, like every good physician, doesn't obey the packaging and just says, I'm going to do more than they recommend. So he went after it. And he started taking really high doses, and so he slammed shut all the tight junctions, not just in the bowel wall, but remember, every single membrane in the body is tight junction dependent. Every single blood vessel, every single blood-brain barrier, every kidney tubule, your hepatocytes, all tied together by tight junctions. So the whole body in Americans right now is leaking. That's best exemplified in an autistic child. Yeah. Leaky gut on the front end. And then once the front end is leaking, you get in all the toxins, all the weird stuff from the food chain coming in. And now that the toxins are there, you can't get them out because the kidneys are leaking. They can't mount the electrical charge across the kidney tubules and get the toxins excreted, everything else. So the body literally becomes a dry sponge for toxin. And that's a disaster. That's when we start to see these really rapid aging effects. We have children right now at the University of Virginia who are under the age of 5 with sarcomas. You know, it's just, these are cancers that never should have been seen in kids. Wow. And so they are literally being born old. Our population is being born at a biologic age of 60 or something because they're getting type 2 diabetes before they're 10.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they're being born old because they don't have a membrane, they don't have bacteria, and their mitochondria are toxic from moment one. We inherit all of our mitochondria from mom. There are no mitochondria in a sperm. And so the only mitochondria we inherit is from the egg. And so that ova gives us the mitochondria, only 3 species of mitochondria. And so the egg then goes on to pass that on. The child should then inherit the other source of redox molecules, their bacterial biome, from mom again. And so dad becomes almost useless in the world of communication. Well, actually, that should have been obvious, I guess, for a lot of reasons, maybe. But the communication is always from the maternal.
Yes.
And so what an interesting thing to think about society-wise. How much should we respect our mothers? What are they passing on? Yes, some chromosomes and all of that, but it's not the DNA that's making that kid healthy. It's their communication network. That's all from mom. So the healthier she is before she conceives that baby, the more mitochondria she'll have in her eggs. And so she can pass that many mitochondria on, you know, and mitochondria can reproduce. And so if she stays healthy or gets healthier during pregnancy, the baby will be born with more mitochondria. When the baby is born, it's going to inherit mom's bacteria from where? From the birth canal, from the vaginal canal. And so devastating to think now that almost 47% of births in America are by C-section.
Yeah.
In C-section, you don't go through a vaginal canal. You have a sterile birth out of an incision that now you get placed on the table next to mom, and whose bacteria did you just inherit? The hospital's. Oh my gosh. Probably not the bacteria you wanted to inherit. What a disaster to imagine that 47% of our babies are now being born with a narrow spectrum of bacteria that can grow in the toxic environment of a hospital. It's devastating. And so this is the scenario where you start to think our children are being born and dehydrated, and they can't mount this. And so when we start our autistic kids on Restore, ultra sensitive. We're talking 3 drops of that liquid under the tongue once a day, and they go into a healing crisis.
Wow.
Healing crisis.
Yeah.
Why is that? Mostly because of water.
I've watched it. Listen, I've watched it with many kids already, and of course adults as well, who are only able to take drops at first, and then you know, people that can take more, like Meredith. So very, very unique.
And so all that's going to ultimately probably come back mostly to that hydration state. So if you start taking the product and you're getting headaches for that first week, most people just push through it. They're like, well, I can manage a little minor headache. It's just like a tension headache. What's actually happening is probably twofold. One of them, your brain's swelling. Your brain's getting hydrated. The volume of your brain, I really believe, is increasing rapidly.
Wow.
The speed at which the brain shrinks is really dramatic. If you put somebody on steroids, which screws up all kinds of tight junction stuff, and it really messed up. So you put somebody on prednisone, like a kid with asthma. These were actually studies that were done in the 1980s when we first got CAT scans. 14 days of a Medrol dose pack that we give for asthma exacerbation. 14 days, you do CT scan before and after, 10% loss of volume of the child's brain. Whoa.
Wow.
Holy crap, you know? And so that brain is losing neural connections, but it's also getting dehydrated. And so the brain is shrinking. And so in those first weeks on this product, brain's actually going to rehydrate, and the volume will increase probably only by 1 or 2%. But that's a stretch on the membranes and everything else, and so that may be a source of some people's headaches. Headaches are very multifactorial. It may be changes of osmolality across a blood vessel, many, many, many different things. But I really think that rehydration of the brain is a fascinating thing to realize. So all the tissues of your body are becoming better hydrated when you start the product, and that can lead to challenges as a physician to kind of help your patient through it. But the more you educate on the front end of the patient, the better. I do want to really hit one thing on that, on these symptoms that can happen in the first week, because I hear almost on a daily basis, oh, I must have a Herx reaction. Not just me, but some of the leading scientists in the field right now of autism and other things are starting to really doubt the concept of a Herx reaction, which is kind of the concept that, oh, you do something good for the body like vitamin C or probiotic or whatever, or a cleanse, and the person gets worse. And we say, well, you must be having a die-off happen. I'm not convinced we have any data at all to say that we have die-off ever really happened that causes a problem. The death of cells through apoptosis is a totally silent event. It doesn't require the immune system. It doesn't cause inflammation. So a Herx reaction, if you had a die-off of a lot of biome in the gut, should have a very minor effect on the human health. So not convinced those actually happen. I think that usually what's happening is an oxidative event where the immune system shifts and the immune system dumps oxidant, and that makes the person feel worse because they don't have an antioxidant reservoir that's big enough to respond yet.
Right.
But as the oxidant continues, their antioxidants increase, they start making more glutathione, and they start to really come out of the woodwork. And so that's why patients, I think, can get worse before better. With Restore, they can't even do that. Restore is such a cool thing. I mean, forget about Restore. Bacteria are such a cool thing. They have put this communication network into play that has an intelligence across the cell system that is so beyond anything we've really imagined before. The communication is so thorough that each cell can actually figure out if it's a cancer cell or not a cancer cell. And so this is the very first compound we've ever seen where by PCR, which is polymerase chain reaction, it's one of the really super sensitive assays we use to watch in real time what's happening in cell signaling. And so with our first RT-PCR studies that we did, we were looking at the rates of reactive oxygen coming out of the mitochondria, these oxidative bursts that can turn on cell suicide. And so this is how I did my chemotherapy stuff, try to get the mitochondria to shoot out this oxidative burst, and then the mitochondria actually perforate and start leaking stuff into the cell, and the human cell then turns into what looks like bubble tea, apoptosis. Over about a 72-hour period, the cell kind of turns into little bubble stuff and starts to disappear. Doesn't require an immune system. It's totally an internal process of cell selection saying this is a cancer cell, it needs to die. When you put Restore onto breast cancer cells or colon cancer cells or prostate or bladder, we've done all of these, within 5 minutes you see reactive oxygen species shooting up from the mitochondria, really fast increase in ROS. That's something I could do with vitamin A, I could do with chemo, different chemo things. That's easy. What the miracle was that none of us had ever seen is we had next to the breast cancer cells controls healthy cells of renal tubules from humans. And the exact opposite thing happened in those mitochondria. The ROS went down. We've never seen one compound do the opposite thing in cell populations based on whether it's a cancer cell or a healthy cell. That shift is very cool for your body because when you start drinking that communication network, every cell in the body is going to say, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I needed a repair, or I'm totally fine, I don't need any repair, or oh my gosh, I'm a cancer cell, and totally different things are going to happen in those three cell populations. And so really fascinating how intelligent the system becomes when the communication network goes back up.
Yeah, that's remarkable. So Meredith, ultimately your cells, no matter what, are communicating better. Obviously, everything's communicating better.